All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Notice is hereby given that in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, the laws of 1975, notice of this meeting has been sent to all school offices, officially designated newspapers, filed with the Township Clerk, and posted in the Board of Education office 48 hours in advance of this meeting. Roll call.
Certainly. Mrs. Berkowitz? Here. Mrs. Pintonelli?
Here.
Mrs. Rothenberg?
Here.
Mr. Schlereth?
Here.
Mrs. Sinande?
Here.
And Mr. Rossini.
Here. Okay, flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So with regard to the board president's report, again, I see there are some people in the audience. Thanks for coming out in person, and thanks for and appreciate your community input, whether it be by email or coming to the meetings. And a number of people did reach out this week too, and I think we replied to everybody to make sure that that their emails were received. With regard to the schools, I just want to point out, and I'm not sure that everybody understands this, that most, if not all, the extracurriculars continue, and they remain popular. There's lots of hands-on activities continuing. The sports teams are all in full action and enjoying their time. So the reason I mention that is partially because we kind of want to make sure that we're still talking about school, and that the school is going, and it's going well, and the kids still seem to be having fun. Finally, importantly, Mr. Fogarty is here from Fogarty and Hara to provide board training, which is not only informative and it's also interesting. So that's the extent of my board report tonight. Thank you. And we'll go to committee reports. Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Schlereth.
Nothing at this time.
Communications and Policies, Mrs. Sinande.
Nothing at this time. Our next meeting is scheduled for the end of March.
Okay, Curriculum and Technology, Mrs. Rothenberg.
Mrs. Dowling reported on the district assessment update last week. If anyone missed it, you can find it on the website, and we will meet again in May. Thank you.
With regard to Finance, Mrs. Pintorelli.
We're still in the midst of budget creation and budget time, and we're awaiting state aid numbers, which hopefully will be out by the end of February, beginning of March.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to negotiations, I have nothing to report tonight. And again, Mrs. Pintorelli, Personnel.
Nothing for tonight.
Okay. You'll see that the committee meeting schedule is in the agenda, so please take note of that. And so now I'm going to move to public comments on agenda items only. Again, it's on agenda items only. The Rivervale Board of Education is committed to encouraging the citizens of Rivervale and employees of the Rivervale School District to speak directly to board trustees. In order to facilitate this communication, residents and employees are requested to 1, to sign in before speaking, 2, to maintain an appropriate sense of decorum, and 3, to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes. The board will also take under advisement the written comments and opinions of non-residents that are submitted to the board secretary. Being mindful of its responsibility to maintain the orderly conduct of meetings, the board retains the right to rule on such matters as the speaker's right to address the board, as well as the appropriateness of the subject being presented. The board's decision in such matters is final. The board also reminds all members of the public that while it subscribes without reservation to the principle of keeping the community informed by policy and law, it cannot allow public discussion of personnel matters, nor can trustees comment on any current or pending litigation. If a matter concerning an employee of the Rivervale Public Schools is of interest or concern to a resident, the matter should be referred to the responsible building principal or the superintendent of schools by telephone, letter, or mail. So I'm going to open the meeting to public comments on agenda items only at approximately 7:06. Looking around, I don't think there's anybody who's going to make a comment on the agenda items. So I will close the meeting to public comments to agenda items at 7:06 and move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for either tuning in or coming out. We certainly appreciate it. So tonight I'd like to welcome Mr. Stephen Fogarty, who will provide board ethics training for us. Mr. Fogarty is a partner at the law firm Fogarty & Hara. Mr. Fogarty practices law, which includes, but is not limited to, the representation of management in education law. So at this time, please welcome Mr. Stephen Fogarty. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Stephen Fogarty, and I'm going to apologize for my back in advance. I'm here tonight to present you with your annual training on ethics, and I'm also going to be talking to you about governance. So I want to begin by saying that this training for the board is required on an annual basis. I'll be covering with you tonight provisions of the Code of Ethics. I'll be talking about your board policies. I'll be spending a good deal of time with you on social media because that's a big issue for us as public officials, as well as a big issue for us in school districts. And I want to begin first with the role of the board. It is said that the Board of Education only has express authority, which means very simply that there's no implied authority. Unless the legislature has given you authority to act, to make rules, to make regulations, then there's no implicit authority. You have the ability to adopt policies and regulations, but all of that must be consistent with the legislative scheme that provides you with that authority as elected public officials. So you do things like approve the curriculum that meets the New Jersey student learning standards. You adopt a budget that provides for a thorough and efficient education. You hire necessary certified personnel to educate the district students, and you develop policies for the management of the school district. It's important to note, and I'm going to get into this in a little more detail, that none of these actions that the board takes does it take alone. It acts upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools. So in terms of the role of the board, in terms of your final authority, what you are the ultimate arbiters of in the Rivervale School District, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, those cases all come to the Board of Education. While they're investigated by our anti-bullying specialists, they go to the superintendent for a superintendent's decision. Ultimately, it is the board that makes a decision with regard to every harassment, intimidation, and bullying case. Long-term suspensions and hearings. Any student that is removed for more than 10 days cannot be removed without final action by the board. Residency appeals. If it is believed that someone is attending our schools unlawfully, does not live in Rivervale, only the board can disenroll a student based on a determination that they do not reside here. Grievances. We have collective bargaining agreements in effect in the school district. Ultimately, if there's a dispute by our teachers with regard to the terms and conditions of their employment, those grievances ultimately wind their way up to the Board of Education. Terminations for cause. A decision to terminate an employee during the term of the employee's contract, a termination for cause, can only happen if the board makes a final decision. Increment withholdings. If it's determined that as a result of poor performance, that an employee should not receive a salary increase from one year to the next, an increment withholding, that can only happen with a recommendation by the superintendent, but with final decision-making by the board. A majority vote of the full board is required. Non-renewals. This is for our non-tenured teachers, those who have been employed less than 4 years, our educational support staff, our paraprofessionals, our teacher aides. Those employees are subject to annual contracts. Every May 15th, the superintendent makes a decision as to whether or not that employee will be renewed from one year to the next. Once the superintendent makes that decision on May 15th, it's a final decision, but that decision can be appealed to the board. It is the one and only time that the board can trump the superintendent's decision and can offer a contract to that employee despite the fact that the superintendent has decided not to renew that contract. The board functions only when it is in session, and a quorum of the board is required to convene a meeting to take action. That seems pretty straightforward to us. That's why we're here tonight. You heard the President make the opening statement that this meeting is in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. So why is this so important for me to emphasize with you? It's not because of what we do here. It's because of what we may do outside of this quorum. And so if we engage in conversations with each other as board members, if we do that through emails or text messages, and we invite responses by a quorum of the board, and if a quorum of the board is involved in responding in real time, we run the risk of violating the Open Public Meetings Act. Violation of the Open Public Meetings Act is not a complaint to the Commissioner of Education. It's actually a complaint to the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office. So it is a serious consideration in terms of how we deal with each other. So when we communicate via email, text message, social media, we want to make sure that we do not solicit a response from everyone. You never want to hit reply all. You never want to invite your board members to be discussing board business outside of a board meeting in real time. And keep in mind that that would apply to emails and text messages. So the board's direct responsibilities are to make policy, develop plans, evaluate outcomes. It's often said that the board's responsibility is to make sure that our schools in Rivervale are well run, not to run the schools themselves. So no board member can, by virtue of his or her office, can exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the schools or individually command the services of any school employee. A board member cannot command that a building principal respond to a board member. Board member cannot command that the business administrator or the superintendent prepare a report at the request of a single board member. If you were to come into this school building tonight and you were not happy about the condition of the hallways, or you went into a restroom and you were not happy about the condition of the restroom, you as a board member could not command that a custodian or a maintenance employee clean up the hallway or the restroom. That would have to go to the superintendent or the school business administrator for an appropriate response. So as laudatory as that purpose might be, as well-meaning as that may be, you do not have the authority as a board member to command any employee in the school district respond to an individual request. You have board policies that reflect, for the most part, what the school ethics, what the Code of Ethics for school board members actually provides. Board members don't have all access to our district schools. In many respects, you have no greater authority than any other parent or community member, which means that you must comply with the visitor's policy. So unless you are touring the schools at the request of the superintendent or the school business administrator, you're looking at a major undertaking in terms of your facilities. From time to time, the board may want to see the progress of those projects. You want to make sure that, that the board's money is being well spent on those capital improvement projects. So from time to time, the board may decide as a board that board members can rotate through our schools to look at the progress of those facilities. But absent the full board authorizing you to do that, you as an individual board member have no authority to do that. You have delegated those responsibilities to your superintendent and to your business administrator. They are accountable to you. Their subordinates are accountable to them. You evaluate the superintendent to make sure that she is advancing your policy, your policy and regulations, and that she is fulfilling the expectations with regard to the outcomes that you have identified for the operation of your schools. The board and the administration. The board-administration relationship is intended to be cooperative, not adversarial. Members are expected, or should, in terms of best practice, share your concerns with the administration in advance of this meeting. You have an agenda tonight. You're going to take action with regard to recommendations by the superintendent and the business administrator. If there's questions about those recommended actions, if you need additional information, that is something that should happen hopefully before you get here. It should be information that you request that's provided to you, that provides for a more effective public response from both you and from members of the public. Also important, and also reflected in your board policies, and that is that if you are confronted with a community complaint, you must withhold comment and instead refer the issue to the superintendent. The board may act only at a public meeting if there has been a failure of an administrative solution. So whether that complaint comes to you in the grocery store, on the soccer field, in an email, somebody posts on a website or on social media, you cannot respond to that complaint or request additional clarification with regard to that complaint. It must be referred to the superintendent of schools. This is a trap for the unwary because many board members are involved in social media. And when you are posting on social media in a website, very often members of the community are raising questions. You know, we tend to be helpers. We tend to be people that want to be responsive to members of the community. We want them to think that this is an effective form of government. And so you have to resist the temptation to respond to those questions. You have to resist the temptation to comment on those questions, because doing so would potentially be a violation of the Code of Ethics and would be a violation of the board's own policy. Your response should be that the complaint should be referred to the superintendent. Your comment should be that complaint should be referred to the superintendent or to the business administrator. The only thing that you can post on social media, essentially with impunity, would be something that is factual. Somebody asks when the next board meeting is scheduled for. Somebody asks about a particular scheduling of an activity or an event. That you could post on social media. Just make sure that the information you're posting is accurate, because that too is a requirement of the Code of Ethics. Code of Ethics specifically requires us as board members to support all district staff, including the administration. So one of the commands of the School Ethics Act is that you will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. It would not be appropriate if the superintendent makes a recommendation or a decision for you to publicly criticize that decision, vilify the superintendent, undermine her authority or her ability to effectively operate your schools. And so a violation of this would occur if there was evidence that you had taken deliberate action to undermine a member of the administration, to harm the school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. Doesn't mean that the board cannot disagree with a recommendation made by the superintendent or by the school business administrator at a public board meeting, but that should happen here. That should happen here. Criticizing those individuals in public is potentially a violation of the Code of Ethics. So, as I've said, it's the primary duty of you as board members to establish policies. It's the primary duty of our superintendent to implement and administer those policies. Superintendent's your primary professional advisor, and policies should not be adopted or revised without consulting the superintendent. So while we may have a policy committee as a standing committee, no policy should be recommended for adoption. No policy should be recommended for revision or modification without consulting with the superintendent. Superintendent's responsible for the development, supervision, and the operation of the school program and facilities, and has to be given wide latitude with regard to developing regulations and to administering the school district. So we're a board as a unit. We're not a collection of individuals. So what does that mean? That means that we come here, we have a robust debate, recommendations are made, we can agree or we can agree to disagree, but once the board elects a single course of action by a majority vote, we are expected as board members to support the board's decision. In open meetings, to preserve decorum and ensure that the board expresses a single, consistent position, it is only our president alone that speaks on behalf of the board. And so what does that mean? That means that if members of the public have questions, they would address them to the board president. A member of the public could not address a question to a board member, could not, despite the fact that you as a board member may be the individual from whom they would like to have a response. That can only happen if the president allows a board member to respond to a member of the public. Also keep in mind that we all come to this process as elected officials with particular talents and expertise, but you also have professionals that you've appointed on an annual basis at your reorganization meeting, your architects, your auditors, your attorneys. In your own professional lives, you may be one of those individuals. We have to respect the opinions that those individuals provide to the board when they are requested to do so. The powers of the board and the authority of a board member are not coextensive. What does that mean? That means that no board member, by virtue of her office, can exercise any administrative responsibility with regard to the schools or as an individual command the services of any district employee. That is reflected in your board policy. Also important, so much comes to us in closed executive session. You are privy to information that no one else in the school district is privy to. There are personnel matters. There are matters involving matters involving our students, matters involving harassment, intimidation, and bullying. All of those issues that come to the board come to you in executive session for that reason, because there are privacy rights which are held by those individuals. Those privacy rights are often said to be sacrosanct, and by that I mean that we cannot disclose that to any other person outside of our executive session. Board policy says specifically that confidential information shall be used only for the purpose of helping the board member discharge his or her official responsibilities. And this expectation exists regardless of the impact the matter has on the board member's own children, or the board member's friends. And the case that went before the School Ethics Commission involved a closed session discussion that took place in a school district. And one of the district's teachers, a 7th grade math teacher, was removed from the school district and required to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. That board member went home and disclosed that to her 7th grade child. So you can imagine the consequences of doing that. The consequences for the teacher, the consequences for the board member, the consequences for the board in terms of the potential for civil liability, the prejudice that could result from that kind of a public disclosure of private matters. One of the main limits on the role of board members is the Code of Ethics for school board members. And so we have these statutory provisions, and they specifically say Code of Ethics for school board members. The jurisdiction for the Code of Ethics is the School Ethics Commission. That is a commission that is appointed by the governor. It is a state agency. They have jurisdiction to decide complaints. They also have jurisdiction to issue advisory opinions. Complaints can be made by anyone. Any individual can file a complaint against any board member or administrator. The only body that cannot file a complaint with the School Ethics Commission is this body. As a Board of Education, you cannot file an ethics complaint against one of your individual board members. That would have to be done by a board member stepping back from your elected position and filing that ethics complaint as an individual private citizen. With regard to advisory opinions, if there's something you want to do, if there's something you're concerned about, if you're going to set up a website, if you're going to engage in outside activities, you're concerned that it may be in conflict with your role as a board member, you can request an advisory opinion from the School Ethics Commission. They're pretty good about it. You make that request by the 10th day of the month, you'll usually get an advisory opinion the following month. That advisory opinion, while it's not binding, gives you advice as to what they believe you can and cannot do as an elected official. And here are the Code of Ethics provisions. The most important of this is confidentiality, ensuring that you are framing policies, that you are not administering your schools, recognizing that authority rests with the full board, and that you cannot make any personal promises or take any private action that has not been authorized by the full board at a public meeting. You have to vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendations of the superintendent. By no means does that mean you're a rubber stamp. If you're not satisfied with the superintendent's recommendation, you may certainly ask her to go back to the well and bring you another candidate, but you cannot leapfrog over her and advance your own candidate who has not been recommended by the superintendent. So what can you do? A number of sections with regard to your limited role. Again, emphasize your policymaking responsibility, non-administration of the schools, protecting school personnel. You can see all of those statutory provisions. Most of those I've already reviewed with you. So what gets us into trouble? Giving a direct order to school personnel, becoming directly involved in activities or functions that are the responsibility of school personnel, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in terms of volunteering, when you are permitted to volunteer and when you are not. That all deals with how extensive your involvement is, whether it involves supervision of personnel, supervision of students, taking deliberate action, which results in undermining or compromising or opposing or harming school personnel, or attempting to resolve a complaint without referring it to the administration. The limits imposed by the Code of Ethics are clearly seen in your involvement in personnel decisions. Board members' role in hiring is to vote to appoint the best qualified personnel. You cannot withhold your approval for arbitrary and capricious reasons. What does that mean? Superintendent comes forward, recommends that I be given a contract in the following year, and the result of that is that I will get tenure. It begins my 5th year of employment in the River Vale School District. You're opposed to tenure, philosophically. You could not withhold your vote based on that recommendation because you were philosophically opposed to the granting of tenure. And why not? Because under the Code of Ethics, you have taken an oath to uphold the laws of the state of New Jersey, tenure being one of them. Advisory opinion. This is one of those opinions that a board member requested in another school district regarding authority to conduct exit interviews of staff members to determine the causes of the staff turnover. So here's a school district where there's been a mass exodus of employees out of the district. The board member is concerned about the culture and climate of the school district, the inability to recruit and to retain employees. And so this board member would like to sit in on the exit interviews with the superintendent to determine what the cause of that is. The School Ethics Commission issued an advisory opinion and said that would not be appropriate under any circumstances. And why? Because that would be interfering with the day-to-day operations of the school district and the role of our superintendent. Another advisory opinion. Board member requested an opinion regarding the appropriate level of involvement of board members in the interview process. The School Ethics Commission explained that 1 or 2 board members may sit on an interview committee when established by the superintendent, but it must be strictly limited to functioning in an advisory role to the superintendent. You could not be involved in the questioning. You could not be involved in the interview process. You would simply sit there as an observer, which is why most boards refrain from being involved in that interview process. That is the best practices that has been articulated by the School Ethics Commission, not as a matter of law, but as a matter of best practice. And whatever practice you are going to use here, you need to make sure that the superintendent agrees with whatever your involvement is, and it must be limited to no more than 2 board members. So here we have a board member who was not happy with the superintendent's recommendation on a candidate. Board member was interested in knowing who all the other candidates were. Superintendent would not turn over those resumes for fear that those individuals' names would be disclosed and it would prejudice them in their own school districts where they had not given notice that they were candidates in this school district. So the board member would not accept that response, took it upon herself to go into the board office. Superintendent wasn't there, commanded one of the secretaries to give her a key, gained access to the superintendent's office so that she could see those resumes. You can see that this complaint was filed and this went south very, very quickly. This resulted in a public reprimand of this board member. In this case, also a complaint before the School Ethics Commission. A board president violated the code by personally issuing a rice notice to the business administrator. Business administrator became so unsettled by what was happening, she tendered her resignation before the board meeting. Complaint was filed against the board president. The commission said she had acted unilaterally without the authority of the board in violation of the Code of Ethics. The only person that can issue a rice notice to an employee of this school district is the superintendent, and the only person that can issue a rice notice to the superintendent is the board president or a majority of this board. They can dictate that a rice notice be issued to the superintendent, no one else. Here, 2 board members believed that the Director of Special Services was double dipping by working in another school district, and they decided to conduct their own investigation, their own reconnaissance mission. They decided to go and camp out at that other school district to see if the Director of Special Services was in fact conducting activities that would have otherwise have been a theft of services. Ultimately, they were wrong, but more importantly, they had undertaken private action in violation of the Code of Ethics. They were both publicly reprimanded by the School Ethics Commission. Volunteering. This issue goes to whether your involvement interferes with the day-to-day operation of the schools. Suffice it to say that you can be involved as board members in any volunteer activities in this school district, provided that you're not supervising staff, you're not directing staff, and you're not supervising students. So in a theatrical production, you can be involved in constructing the stages, you can be involved in fundraising, you can be involved in ordering, you can be involved in any of those ministerial activities. You could not select the students who get those roles. You could not direct our personnel with regard to the performance of their responsibilities. So save that kind of involvement. You can be involved in any activity under the auspices of this school district. Outside activities, booster clubs, educational foundation, PTO, no restrictions. Those organizations are not under the auspices of the Board of Education. You may be involved in those organizations. You may hold offices in those organizations. You may be trustees. But if any matter comes before this board in which one of those organizations is requesting use of facilities, they want to conduct a tricky tray, they want to do a fundraiser, you must abstain from voting on whatever they are requesting the board allow them to do. So you can see here that a board member requested an advisory opinion because she wanted to be a club advisor. And this was a situation where there was a club in the school district and they could not get a teacher to volunteer to be that club advisor, even with the payment of a stipend. And so the board member, wanting that club to be able to continue for the next school year, asked the School Ethics Commission, asked for an advisory opinion as to whether she could be the club advisor without compensation. They said no. And they said no because regardless of whether the board member was being compensated, she would have been involved in the day-to-day operation of the school, supervising students, directing those students. It would have been a violation of the Code of Ethics. Free speech in the School Ethics Act. So the question that's often asked of me by board members is, do we retain our First Amendment right of free speech when we become elected officials? And the short answer is, to that is, you retain your First Amendment right of free speech with many restrictions. So what you did as a private citizen, you can no longer do as an elected public official. And if you express your opinion about school district business or even about issues of significant public concern, you have an obligation to self-identify. So what does that mean? Self-identify means that before I can make that statement or express that opinion, whether it's a letter to the editor, or it's a posting on Facebook, or it's a posting on a website, or it is something that I post on any social media, I have an obligation to say, my name is Stephen Fogarty. I am a member of the Rivervale Board of Education, and the opinion that I'm about to express was not authorized by the Board of Education, and I have not been authorized to make it. It is made by me as a private citizen. And there's no wiggle room there. You've got to make that entire statement. It's up there. I commend it to all of you so that if you are involved in any of those communications, social media, letter to the editor, public statement before another municipal agency, before the mayor and council, before the zoning board, you have an obligation to self-identify. To date, the Commission has not issued an advisory opinion regarding social media postings or a board member's right to comment on topics of public interest via social media. However, their best practice advice is you must self-identify even for those postings. And you want to be very careful with this. It's a trap for the unwary. If you're involved in social media, not only do you have to self-identify, but you need to be very careful, even in self-identifying, that you are not responding to a complaint or commenting about a complaint. So even though you self-identify, it does not mean that you can do that and then go forward and comment or attempt to resolve an inquiry. So this is a case in which the board president filed a complaint after another board member posted certain statements on Facebook and in a local newspaper. First Facebook posting said the school board president doesn't let students speak. The board votes for programs that are not effective. 6 months is not long enough to write a plan. Second Facebook posting said, now if we could only do something about our local terrorists that destroy dreams and burn futures. Under this statement was a link to the photograph of the superintendent. That was all found to be a violation of the Code of Ethics. It checked off every box. Every box. Not supporting the administration, not self-identifying, taking private action that could prejudice the board. All of that was found to be grossly inappropriate. And what else can happen as a result of that? Defamation of character and substantive due process rights. So there are, unfortunately, a number of cases in which board members have made statements on social media of and about school personnel, and they have found themselves on the other end of a civil lawsuit alleging that they had committed acts of defamation, libel, invasion of privacy. And in those situations, you want to be particularly careful, because what you do here as elected officials at a public board meeting, you are indemnified and held harmless. Your statements, for the most part, can be made at a public meeting, and even if there is a cause of action brought against you, you are entitled to be indemnified and held harmless under the statutory provisions that protect public officials. But if you do it outside of this meeting, you run the risk that you will not be indemnified. And if you're not indemnified, then our insurance policies that would otherwise provide you with a defense and indemnify you even from a judgment may very well not be available to you. So you want to be very careful about what you say and do on social media, particularly if you're commenting about personnel in the school district. This was a case out of the Westfield Board of Education. A middle school teacher, a former basketball coach, filed a defamation suit claiming that the Board of Education had published defamatory comments about him on Facebook and Twitter. The teacher contended that those false allegations resulted in his wrongful termination from his coaching position, interfered with his prospective economic advantage. Suffice it to say that he was not able to prove actual malice, and after 2 years, the case was dismissed. But the takeaway here for me, and hopefully for you, is you don't want to be on the other side of a lawsuit like this. You simply do not. Likewise, another case out of Pennsylvania, a plaintiff was terminated from his position as a director of security and safety. Ultimately, information was leaked to social media about the reasons for that individual's termination. He sued the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. Ultimately, that case also was dismissed, but the takeaway here also is that individuals in this school district, whether they are employees or they are students, they have liberty interests that must be protected. Social media. So it's important for me to point out that you have a board policy on social media. And why do I distinguish that from everything else I've told you? Because it's not a mandated policy. And because it's not a mandated policy, there are many provisions in this policy which may not fall within the jurisdiction of the School Ethics Commission. The School Ethics Commission's jurisdiction is based on the Code of Ethics and prohibited acts as identified by our legislature. But you have gone one step farther. You have said that you are going to adopt a social media policy in order to ensure that all of us stay in our lane and stay on the right side of our ethical responsibilities. And so the difference also is that if we become troubled or if we object to something that one of us has done and the School Ethics Commission has jurisdiction over it, only they can adjudicate it. Only they can take action. You could not come out at a public board meeting and publicly sanction me for something that only the School Ethics Commission has jurisdiction to adjudicate. But when it comes to this policy, if it's not covered by the Code of Ethics, the School Ethics Commission does not have authority over these provisions, then this board has the ability to marshal its own members. You have the ability to say, we're going to hold you to this policy, and if you abridge it, we're going to hold you publicly accountable. And so let's go through it. Policy says that you will not post anything that would violate any of the district's policies for board members, that you will uphold the district's value of respect for any individual and avoid making defamatory statements about the board, the school district, employees, students, or their families. You will not disclose any confidential information obtained as a result of being a board member. You will not use or refer to the your Board of Education title or position when soliciting for a business organization or, for that matter, posting social media. You want to be very careful that you're not posting using your title or referring to the Rivervale Board of Education. Goes on. You'll refrain from having communication through social media networks with other board members regarding the Board of Education in order to avoid a potential violation of the Open Public Meetings Act, which was really my opening remarks to you about emails and text messages. And as an aside, your emails, your text messages, your posting on social media, those are all government records. What does that mean? Under the Open Public Records Act, under OPRA, any communication that we have with each other is a government record. Whether anybody in this audience could have access to it depends upon its content. But your text messages to one another, your emails, your posting on social media are government records. Depending upon its content will determine whether anybody has access to it, which is why your communication should be limited to your school district email address, only email over the district server, and obviously when you're posting on social media, you want to be very careful about that. And if you're text messaging to somebody about school business, you want to be very careful about that as well, because I do not want your cell phone to be subject to a phishing expedition if somebody is demanding access to text messages. You should not respond to any postings regarding the board, school district business, or respond to any question or inquiry posted to the board member or posted on any social network regarding the Board of Education or school district business. And you should not post any information on a social network determined by the School Ethics Commission that would be a violation of their provisions. So you have a fairly sweeping, comprehensive social media policy. I suggest that you take the opportunity to review it, particularly if you are engaged in social media. You are finished with me for tonight, but I will answer your questions. Privilege being with you. If you have any questions after tonight, get them to Melissa or to Kelly, and I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, as I said, informative and interesting. Anything else for the superintendent's report?
No, that's all. Thanks.
Okay, board secretary's report?
Thank you. Sticking with the ethics, I just want to remind the board that the school ethics personal, relative, and financial disclosure forms are out and available, and they're due April 30th. Thank you.
Okay, that's it? Okay. So now we're going to move on to general resolutions. Just general, there's only one, G1. Is there a motion to move it?
I'll move it.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Okay, there being no discussion, roll call, please.
Certainly. Mrs. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Pintorelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schlereth?
Yes.
Mrs. Sanande?
Yes.
And Mr. Rossini?
Yes. Moving on to business resolutions, resolutions B1 and B2. Can I have a motion, please?
I'll move it.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Certainly. Mrs. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Pintorelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schlereth,
Yes.
Mrs. Sanande,
Yes.
and Mr. Rossini.
Yes. Now we're going to move on to personnel resolutions, P1 through P3. Can I have a motion, please, to move those?
I'll move them.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion. Okay, no discussion. Roll call, please.
Certainly. Mrs. Berkowitz,
Yes. Excuse me, yes.
Mrs. Pintarelli,
Yes.
Mrs. Rothenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Schlereth,
Yes.
Mrs. Sanande,
Yes.
and Mr. Rossini.
Yes. We will now move on to public comments on general items. The Rivervale Board of Education is committed to encouraging the citizens of Rivervale and employees of the Rivervale School District to speak directly to board trustees. In order to facilitate this communication, residents and employees are requested, 1, to sign in before speaking, 2, to maintain the appropriate sense of decorum, and 3, to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes. The board will also take under advisement the written comments and opinions of non-residents that are submitted to the board secretary. Being mindful of its responsibility to maintain the orderly conduct of meetings, the board retains the right to rule on such matters as the speaker's right to address the board, as well as the appropriateness of the subject matter being presented. The board's decision in such matters is final. The board also reminds all members of the public that while it subscribes without reservation to the principle of keeping the community informed by policy and law, it cannot allow public discussion of personnel matters, nor can trustees comment on any current or pending litigation. If a matter concerning an employee of the Rivervale School District, principal, or the superintendent of schools, if there's a matter concerning an employee of the Riverdale School District, you can reach out to the principal or the superintendent of schools by either telephone, letter, or email. And I will open the meeting to general items, public comments at approximately 7:48 p.m.
Hello. Dana Apostle, 626 Stanley Place.
Hi, good evening.
Of course, my printer is not
Excuse me,
working.
I don't want to interrupt, but would you also please sign it?
Oh,
Sign in?
sure.
There's a sign in right there.
And while I'm signing in, my printer broke, so I'll be reading from my phone. Okay. My name is Dana Apostle, and my husband Brian is home with our children tonight. Our daughter Morgan is in kindergarten at Woodside, and our 3-year-old son Casey attends Lily Pond. He will be in kindergarten in September of 2024. First and foremost, and so important, I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Jasper, Mrs. May, and all of the Woodside Elementary staff for doing their absolute best job each and every day as we continue to navigate the mandates that our schools are currently facing. Without such dedicated staff, our kids might not even be in school. I went back and forth as to whether or not I wanted to speak tonight. This is really not my comfort zone, in case you couldn't tell. It's much easier to allow my neighbors to do the work, but that's not who I am. In the next few minutes, I will speak less facts. I feel that the facts speak for themselves, but I'm here to speak from my heart. I'm here tonight to plead that once Governor Murphy's executive mask mandate has expired, we can please move forward in the direction of mask choice within the Rivervale school system. Morgan is missing 6 teeth. It's the cutest thing we've ever seen. I asked her the other night if her teachers have commented on her silly smile and if they've seen it, and her response was, I think maybe one day at outdoor recess. She had no idea. So let's just all think about that. In addition, I will not bore anyone with the details of her stubborn perioral dermatitis. I believe you all received via email, I should say, a couple of weeks ago, which spread all over her face because according to her dermatologist, the masks are a breeding ground for dirty moisture when worn for this many hours a day, and it caused a terrible flare-up. It's taken countless of appointments to try and suppress this inflammation. We've seen some improvement, but we're definitely not there yet. Masking my children, it wears on me every day. I want my children to be just that, children. As I sit at work without my mask, I find myself feeling guilty and sad that Morgan cannot do the same within her classroom. Why are our children held to a harsher standard than we expect of ourselves? Why are our children still sacrificing for us after 2 years? I'm really just so afraid of the implications this is going to have, and the scariest part is that we won't know for years to come, at which point it's too late. How many of you watched the NFL playoff games this past Sunday, or will probably be watching the Super Bowl in 2 weeks? Even if you didn't watch from start to finish, which I definitely did not, I'm sure you're aware of the 70,000 plus fans that swarmed the stadium again without a mask. I don't think I need to elaborate on this topic. I think what hurts the most is that in 75% of the country, parents do have the choice. Our children are suffering in the game of inconsistencies. Nothing breaks my heart more than this. The best reason for dropping school mask mandates is simply that masks on kids are harmful and have little or no effect on protecting kids or reducing transmission. There are more than 150 studies that show this. As the expiration of the mask mandate is near, please consider the child in all of us. Think back to your own childhood, the memories that you made playing with friends, hugging classmates, holding hands, sharing crayons, bragging about the loss of your first tooth, group projects, singing in school concerts, high-fiving teachers and friends, school dances, crowded sporting events, the list continues. We were not masked for any of this. It is our only job to create the best life for our children, and covering their adorable faces and impressionable minds is not the way to do it. I leave you with a quote that has continued to push me through the past 2 years. You never know what's around the corner. It could be everything, and it could be nothing. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. One day you look back and you've climbed a mountain. I feel as though for the past 2 years, like most parents, I wake up every day, make the most conscious decision to just keep putting one foot in front of the other while hiding my frustrations, my sadness, my deepest concerns, and my feeling of helplessness as a mother from my friends, my coworkers, and most of all, my children. Unfortunate for my husband, there's no hiding that from him. And let me say, we do know what's around the corner. We know what we'll find is a happier, healthier life for the well-being of our most precious treasures, our children. We have to get to the top of this mountain. Let's make it a priority to instill the innocence back into their lives. The time to do so is now. As February 10th quickly approaches all of us, let us please dissect the facts and then not only use our heads, but also our hearts when considering the parents and children of Rivervale. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon.
Megan Fulham, 180 Doretta Street. So I first want to start off by acknowledging that our district is doing good work in finding a significant amount of normalcy during what by far is not a normal time. I'm sure you probably feel like you sit up here at these meetings and feel like you're bombarded with our concerns and our questions, and we are here for that. But, you know, I've heard some completely irrational and harmful policies that are being instituted in neighboring schools, and I am very grateful that our town has not made a lot of those same poor decisions, and so I thank you for that. But with that said, there's always room for improvement, and I'm here again tonight because I want to continue to encourage you to reconsider some of our current policies, the ones that we have control over. So for example, regarding close contacts and, you know, continuing to quarantine and keeping healthy children at home. I think we know that there's not going to be any statistics or evidence out there that's going to show that keeping a healthy child at home is better off for everyone in the classroom. Before COVID, sick children stayed home. If a child threw up in the classroom next to your child, you didn't get a phone call. You weren't told to keep your kid home in case they got sick. That child went home and everybody continued on their way. So I'm just curious if there's any specific data that you're using to continue to follow these rules about the quarantine and keeping healthy kids home just because they merely were sitting next to someone who tested positive. Like, is there specific data that you're following that's having you do this, or is it just from the health department, you know, recommendations?
So I'm sure you're aware that just being in the field, that there is not specific data that school districts follow. We are not the health officials. We have to follow what the health officials tell us to do and recommend us to do. And you just want to be reminded too that some of those practices that you had mentioned, they also wind up in mandated policies. So although they might not be through an executive order, they are through policies.
So you are required, like all these quarantine rules, it's all CDC recommendations, that is a requirement, or you can make the decision to?
It depends on which specific ones. What you can do is I encourage you to look at the Road Forward policy. That's a mandated policy, and you can look through all of that. That'll help give you some clarity.
Okay. So the reason that I'm bringing all this up is because, I'm not just speaking from a place of, a parent wanting my child's face to be uncovered, but looking at things that are coming out more and more and, from different articles and things that are posted. So in the hopes that you will consider ending these close quarantine rules, because again, I don't want to beat a dead horse. There's certain things that are out of your control, but I feel like this is in your control. According to the Journal of American Medical Association of Pediatrics from an article in January, it says the toll of school closures and social isolation on children's mental health cannot be overstated and will require both immediate and long-term investigation and action to fully assess and address the impact. It additionally stated that school closures, and I know we're not closing schools anymore, but when we send home children for extended periods of time, school is closed for them and they are stuck at home remote. These school closures were associated with negative mental health impacts for both parents and students, considerable impacts across emotional, behavioral, and restlessness in attention problems, marked rises in screen time, social media use, and reductions in physical activity, increased obesity, and learning loss. And Dr. Joseph Allen, who's been very vocal, is a professor and director of healthy buildings at Harvard, states that the risk of severe outcomes to kids from coronavirus infection is low, and the risk to kids from being out of school are high. So there's many New Jersey school districts that have already recently made quarantine optional after school close contacts. Towns like Middletown, Montague, Franklinville, Rumson, Union Township, and Chatham. I'd really like to see our district do the same. While your hands may currently be tied regarding masks, these quarantine rules that are recommendations, at this point, 2 years in, we don't have data that supports continuing the isolation and damage that quarantine is causing our children. Even those that have not been considered a close contact are suffering. Back in December, my second grader told me that there were many days that there were more students at home doing remote school than there were present in his classroom. I can speak as a teacher and say that none of those students were getting what they needed during that time, and it certainly wasn't for lack of effort on the teacher's part. It is just not humanly possible to provide a quality education and the one-to-one support that our younger learners truly need when you're juggling children on a computer screen with those in your classroom. The teachers worked so hard last year to make it work, and while we did everything we could, nobody can say that it was a great year of education. This is not how it should continue to be. So I'm just curious if there is any thought, if it's part of discussion to end these rules going forward, to give it a try, to not continue to keep home healthy children, to leave it up to, make it an option. If you're contacted, you're considered a close contact, whether you send your child to school or not.
We are always having these discussions because we share the same sentiment that we all want to get back to as typical a school year as possible. And I appreciate that you started off by recognizing so many things that we brought back. So we're always having these discussions. We're always consulting with our county offices, our health departments, our board attorney on what we can and cannot do.
Okay, well, I'll hope then that we hear that soon. I just want to finish by revisiting my concerns that I know I shared last week in regards to masking. I'm sure maybe you've heard that the Westwood School District, which one of their elementary schools is just down the road from us, has already communicated with their community that the district's mask mandate will cease when the governor's mask mandate expires. I know the fact is that even if it doesn't happen next week, that I hope someday it will, and I want to believe that you've done the research and you can see that it's in the best interests of our children to allow mask wearing to be a choice as soon as that's possible. So knowing that there is potential come February 10th for the mask mandate to be lifted, is there any plan made for when that opportunity arises, or have you come to a decision about what you will do?
Yeah, of course. If the mandate expires, and we will communicate to the public as soon as we are able. As soon as we get that information, we'll be ready to go and get that information out to you guys.
Okay. But you're not saying whether it will be that
Correct.
it's lifted or
Correct.
it's-
You will not
okay.
get an answer tonight. I'm sorry to disappoint.
Well-
but rest assured
Okay.
that we will be prepared.
Right.
Okay,
For
well,
sure.
And I know that I and the board, other board members are certainly aware of the situation, and it's not like we have our heads in the sand and we're not thinking about it.
Okay. Well, hopefully, just to give you some more information to help you with that decision, another quote that I found that I thought was important said from Dr. Allen, "We should make masking in schools voluntary rather than mandatory. Masking was a necessary inconvenience early on and in short stints was fine, but to think that 2 years of masking has no impact on socialization, learning, and anxiety is short-sighted. Kids are resilient, but not endlessly resilient." So that word resilient, I feel like, comes up, and I said last week that everybody throws around that our children are so resilient, but like, what does it mean to be resilient? I'm a language arts teacher, so to be resilient is to be able to recover quickly or to withstand difficult conditions, right? So I know that when I teach my 2 young boys and my students about what it is to be resilient, I'm encouraging them to not give up on themselves after they did poorly on a test, to come see me for the next extra help session. That's resilience. I want them to try out for the school basketball team or soccer team after they got cut next and try out again next year. That's resilience. I want them to try to figure out the answer with me, even though when they first raised their hand, it was incorrect. That's resilience, and that is the type of resilience that we should be teaching our children. Being resilient should not be to learn to just deal with wearing a mask during gym class and ask for a break so you can stand against the wall by yourself to catch your breath. Resilience should not be learning how to get through hours of mask wearing while also trying to learn new math steps or reach a new reading level. We should not teach them that resilience is allowing the fears of others to keep you from childhood experiences that you will never get back. That is not resilience. To me, that is complete disregard for the well-being and emotional needs of the children who count on all of us, the adults in their lives, to be there for them. We have to do better. We need to do better. If on February 10th you are given the chance, please do the right thing for our children. And until then, do what you can to continue to get us back to normalcy, like lifting the close contact quarantining. Their school days should be as normal as possible. No more lunch in their classrooms. No more sitting alone at indoor recess staring at a computer. No more mask wearing while they're running around in gym class. No more. The last normal school day for our children was 689 days ago. Our children cannot take any more, and the consequences to their mental health are just too great to continue to ignore. Thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just want to remind the public, just be mindful of the time. We have a lot of people here tonight, and I wouldn't want anyone to go home and not have their voice heard. So just be mindful of that 5 minutes so we can make sure everybody's heard.
Good evening. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm Holly Shapizi,
Yes.
754 Tiffany Ave. I'm here in 2 capacities. One as a mom of a 5th grader, and also as your state senator. Coming to, one, thank you all for your service. It's been an incredibly difficult time to be on a Board of Ed. And being in the legislature, having a lot of the same frustrations that you may have in not receiving, guidance all the time, having to try to understand on any given day what new mandates coming out, what it means for students such as my son, as well as how do you move forward. Being down in Trenton, I can say for the first time throughout this pandemic, both sides of the aisle are starting to agree that 2 years into it, we need to figure out how to move forward, how to allow our kids to move forward, not to have the continued learning loss that a lot of our children have had, as well as how to enable our kids to not have that social isolation, not have to wear masks, and to re-engage for whatever portion of their school remains. So I am here as the next couple of weeks unfold. If you need any guidance, if you need any answers, I live in this community. Both of my children have gone to this school. Reach out, use me as a resource. I know I met with a group of parents from Upper Saddle River today. They've been told by their Board of Ed and by their board attorney that they have concerns about lifting mask mandates even in the event the executive order goes away, because they've been told by board attorneys that their insurance coverage would potentially get knocked out for the school. I don't know, Steve Fogarty, I don't know if that's something that you've seen, heard, and if that's the case, I'd like to be able to facilitate and legislatively fix that. I don't want schools to be encumbered if in 10 days the executive order does go to the wayside. You know, right now the rate of transmission is the lowest that it's been. It's 0.5 as of today. It may even be lower. There's really no reason whatsoever for us to be in a continued state of emergency. So we're all very hopeful that common sense will prevail. If that does occur, are there any potential legal roadblocks that we haven't thought of that would put pressure on the school, on the boards, to not lift the mandates themselves?
Well, what I can do, because we're always consulting with our board attorneys, so I will reach back out to them and discuss some of those specific concerns that you raised, and then I can help circle back to the board.
Okay. But if there are, I'd like to help facilitate.
So with regard to the insurance issue, that really depends on the general liability policy that each school district has. And I know that there are some school districts who did have to commit to certain obligations under those policies because back in March of 2020, when it came time to renew their policies, the policy that was in effect would have had a COVID-19 exclusion, and school districts, and so the school districts had to go out and shop those insurance policies in order to find an insurance carrier that would insure them without COVID-19 exclusions. And so certain representations had to be made, but that's going to be specific to each school district. Certainly something that I think they have to look at with regard to how they move forward with regard to the executive order, assuming it's lifted in the right condition.
Okay, and last question, if there was to be legislation introduced to provide immunity, would that, in your opinion, clear up some of those issues?
It certainly may clear up some of those issues.
Okay.
And as we move forward, if that becomes an issue, I would not hesitate to call upon your office or to have the school districts that we represent do the same thing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Shapezi.
Hi, everybody. Tom Maloney, 619 Charles Court in Riverdale.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. A little bit of a unique scenario. We have a first grader here, at Roberge. He suffers from hearing loss. He relies on hearing aids to talk with his friends and to interact with his teachers here. And while there's great technology, While there's great technology for his teachers, having to say to another first grader, "Can you say that again?" on the playground, in the gym, in the classroom, is extremely frustrating. Sometimes he just will forget about it and say, never mind. And hearing loss, it runs in my wife's family, and it continuously gets worse and worse. And every month that he continues to wear masks in school, we're losing. We don't know. I mean, we could be losing years and years of his development, and we just don't know about it. So we feel very strongly that this is having such a negative impact on our children. As Megan said earlier, there's in Westwood there's school districts that are changing their policies, and they're not waiting to see what happens with the executive order. So my sister and a lot of friends live in Westwood. The feedback has been resoundingly positive about what their superintendent had to say. So, not only with the already stating that once the executive order is lifted, that, masks will become optional, but that there's now going to be a test and stay program that is not just for vaccinated, it's for unvaccinated kids as well. I know that came up last week, and the thought was if we did have it here, it would be only for vaccinated, but they're already getting ahead of that as well. They're also relying on their school doctors and their board doctors, not just what the New Jersey Board of Ed, and they're not just taking everything at face value what the CDC or what New Jersey is saying. So I would strongly encourage us to do all of that here as well. I know Megan and some other parents had just asked, it seems like we're not ready to make a decision yet, but I personally am just not happy with that answer. I mean, I don't want us to hide behind the executive orders and wait till February 10th, and if it's not lifted, say there's nothing we could do. So I'm really curious to know when we will have a decision. I'm really, we're 9 days away. When will we have a decision, when this will be communicated to us about Rivervale's, what we're going to do about, particularly about mask mandates, so that we can, have that answer.
Unfortunately, I'm just going to repeat what I said before, that we will not be communicating to the public about the mask mandate unless we get information from the state that the executive order expires. And then, then we will let the community know immediately. If the executive order does not get lifted, then our hands are still tied. We have to comply with that executive order.
I understand that, Superintendent, but if it is lifted, will we have an answer that day?
Well, if it gets lifted at midnight, probably not to the next morning, but I will tell you, you will have an answer as soon as it's possible. We know everybody is anxious to hear this.
Okay. I mean, so there will be a decision made by the board prior to the formal decision made by Governor Murphy.
It has to be, because we have to get that communication out to you guys.
Okay, thank you. And do you interact with Dr. Jill Mortimer and the other school?
Of course, all the time. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm curious, what data, what went into her decision that we're not ready to act on?
I can't speak in her behalf. I know that they did send out communication that if the mandate gets lifted, then it will become optional in Westwood. But I only have the same information publicly that you guys have publicly.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
My name is Robert Burns, and I have two daughters attending Roberge in 1st and 4th grade. I also have a 3-year-old son attending preschool in town. I'd like to start, like others, by thanking the teachers and administrators and the board members for navigating yet another challenging school year. We know a lot more about COVID today than we did 2 years ago. We have data, peer-reviewed clinical studies, and facts, all teaching us more about this virus than we knew in March of 2020. This data is all available now, empowering us to make informed decisions. And as adults, parents, teachers, administrators, and BOE members, it is our responsibility to use this information to make the right decisions for our children. This is our responsibility, and that is why we are here. One day our children will ask us to tell them a story about the pandemic that happened when they were in grade school. Stories of how we picked them up from Auberge with all of their belongings as they left the building and were told, "We'll see you in 2 weeks." Stories of lockdowns and mandates, stories of missed time with their loved ones and missed birthday parties. And they'll ask us, "What did you do to fix it?" What will we say to them? The following towns can say they stood up and did something. They reviewed the facts and data available to them and used some common sense, in contrast with what the CDC recommendations are, and put children and their well-being first. And they imposed optional close contact quarantine policies. Middletown, Montague, Franklinville, Rumson, Union Township, Chatham, to name a few, and most recently, if people have pointed out tonight, Westwood and Old Tappan have announced optional masking if and when the mandate is dropped. It's time for Rivervale to join this list, and it's time to stop keeping healthy children home from school. As we know and have the data to prove, rarely does an identified close contact individual then become COVID positive. As a state, we are coming up on a crucial time where the governor's mask mandate in schools could end. What will we do? Will we continue to mandate masking our children and continue to inflict the following harm on them? Emotional trauma, social impairment, bacterial infection, cognitive decline, speech delay, developmental delay, excessive carbon dioxide exposure, and child suicides. These are all proven side effects of masking kids by organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization. We've sent you the sources, and we will gladly send you them again if needed. Or will Rivervale make masking optional and help to reduce the trauma our children have endured? Will we help lift the fears that we as a society innately instilled in them? Will Rivervale stand up and push back on these senseless recommendations? I sure hope so. Our kids are counting on it. Many parents keep saying their kids are unfazed by masks or don't mind being taught through a plastic shield on their desk. Of course they are. They are simply doing as they are told. They are being rule followers as we've always taught them to be. My wife and I have done our best to teach our kids that masks are not the norm, that 6 feet apart is not the norm, virtual birthday parties are not normal, and so on. But the fact is they're in school for 6 hours a day away from the normal we work so hard to instill in them, and we cannot protect them from the abnormal state that school in general has become. When does it end? It's been 2 years. It's time. The wheels of truth grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. When we look at the pandemic through the lens of history, it will be clear that we betrayed our children. The risks of this pandemic were never to our children, yet they were forced to carry the burden of it. Our children didn't make sacrifices. We sacrificed our children. Life comes with risks. I wish no one ever died of COVID. I wish we could eliminate it forever, but we can't. One of the roles of a parent is to analyze risk and to use that risk analysis in an intelligent fashion. Flu, pneumonia, heart disease, drowning, gun violence, and motor vehicle accidents, among other things, were all deadlier to children than COVID during the same time periods annually from 2015 to 2020. The annualized number of children under 18 who died in motor vehicle crashes was 6 times higher than the number of children who died of COVID. And yet we get up every day and put our children in cars and drive them to school. And the reason is simple, because we are sane individuals who are capable of analyzing and determining risk, or at least we once were. There are only 16 states that still require masks to be worn in schools. 34 states have said enough is enough. Nearly 70% of the country has allowed children to return to some sense of normalcy. This ends when normal people decide that they have had enough and continue to behave normally. It is when people out there say, my kids are not going to wear masks in school. It's when people stand up and recognize that we have to live with COVID for the rest of our lives. It's enough. It's time for a return to normal life and to put an end to the policies that aren't making society safer, but are sacrificing our children's mental, emotional, and physical health. I will leave you with a quote from one of our founding fathers, John Adams. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Please choose facts over fear. Please make quarantining optional, and please make masking optional for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Avery Mendez, and I attend Holdren Middle School as an 8th grader. I felt compelled to speak tonight because I've noticed that the only people speaking at these meetings are parents, who happen to be secondary sources. Students like me, on the other hand, are primary sources. Therefore, their voices should have the most influence. After all, we are the ones who are going through it. I'd like to draw attention to the fact that I've never once had a normal year in middle school. This started when I was in 6th grade and is still going on. At this rate, I may not even have a normal high school experience either. Some may argue that the school has in fact returned to normal and the only abnormal things are the masks and plastic dividers, but I say different. As many others have stated previously, the masks are obviously hard to breathe and speak through. Just last week, I had 3 difficult assessments back to back, and I began to hyperventilate. As soon as I lowered my mask to calm myself, I was immediately reprimanded and told to fix it. While I do not have asthma, I know there are many who do, and they have told me that they have struggled with breathing properly when their faces are covered. The masks also make it hard to hear others when they are speaking, the same for the plastic dividers on every desk. In my science class, for example, I happen to sit in the very back behind rows of plexiglass and masks, and I can never hear my teacher. The same is for him. If I raise my hand to answer a question, he always asks me to repeat myself. Now, these are 2 very well-known and talked about issues, and that's why I've chosen not to speak widely about them. I believe one of the largest issues with these masks is the fact that they cause a divide and disconnect between the students. Well, just this morning, I fell into a conflict with one of my peers because of the masks. Now, I've never had a normal 8th grade year, but I'm pretty sure 13 and 14-year-olds don't often talk about politics. Most children attending Holdrum are incredibly opinionated and passionate, including myself. I would normally see this as a wonderful trait. However, it's now creating more conflict than ever. Kids are constantly arguing about the masks or the vaccine and even roping teachers into these conversations. Isn't it ironic that when inside, unless you're 6 feet away from everyone, you cannot take your mask off, but when outside, all rules are cast aside? When indoors, students are told to keep their masks on at all times. However, when we exit the building, you may go within any distance of someone as you'd like, mask or not. I see kids hugging and playing basketball every time we're dismissed for recess. The indoor rules also do not apply when we are in gym class. If we're exercising, I suppose COVID is inexistent, or at least that's how the teachers treat it. Perhaps the most unjust and unnecessary rule is the quarantining one. If any student is in close contact with a student that has COVID, we are forced to quarantine, not for 5 days as I've heard the elementary schoolers do. At least in my case, it was 10 days. Not only are we unable to see anyone but our families for almost 2 weeks, but we also must deal with online schools once again. I should know the difficulties as this happened to me. After being out of school for 2 weeks in December, it was very uncomfortable returning to school. Most kids judged me and tried to stay away from me as they assumed I had COVID. Now let's look back at this close contact rule. We're told to keep our masks up as that will prevent the illness from spreading, and yet it still spreads. No response. As I mentioned in school today, a vaccine should provide solidarity and immunity. If not, why have it? The exact same goes for the masks. If we are to get COVID whether we wear a mask or not, what's the point? In fact, they seem to have many more cons than pros. Once again, as a primary source in this situation, I should have a say as to what I wear on my face. If others wish to wear masks, so be it. I respect your opinion. However, as someone who has suffered greatly from small pieces of cloth, I should have an option to take it off. Thank you.
Eva, we appreciate your opinion. Would you do me a favor? Just before you step away, Simon.
Thank you for coming out tonight, too.
Yeah.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Katie Cunningham, 648 Orangeburg Road, and I think we can all agree that was a really tough act to follow, so she's very brave, so good for her. My question is more of a protocol nature, and you've covered a lot of it, and so no need to belabor it. And for context, I can tell you that I have a first grader at Woodside and a daughter who will be in kindergarten next year. My first grader is in the LLD program, so without getting into too many specifics, while the mask mandate is hard on everyone, it is exceptionally hard on him. And I think most recently what was really tricky is that when we talk about his reading time, he spends a good portion of it watching people read to him on YouTube versus having an actual human being read to him because it's hard to see the pronunciation while his teacher's wearing a mask. So it's heartbreaking. And I think for context on kind of how we view the town and how the town feels, my husband and I, a couple of years ago, were the ones that put out those trick-or-treaters are welcome here signs. So by and large, we feel like the community wants normalcy. That was when we really had no idea about COVID. People wanted a normal Halloween for the kids, and people embraced it. We put out 375 signs all over town, and people really wanted to make something normal for the kids. So to that end, I feel like there are a lot of people who can't come to these meetings that are probably listening or watching, and thank you very much for allowing people to view this on YouTube. And there may be people that are just, don't want to end up on your typical cable news network or what have you. There's people that want to be heard. So when you're making this decision about whether or not to lift the board mandate, the mask mandate rather, would a petition be something that you would factor into your decision-making process?
I think we have a pretty clear idea of, because like you said, people email us, which is great. Every time someone emails us, we make sure we let them know, like, we got it, we value your feedback. So, you guys are absolutely welcome to do a petition, but I don't know. I don't think it would be, I don't think it would persuade us either way, because I think we have a pretty good pulse. And on top of that, we have a lot of factors we take into consideration with this decision. You guys are a large stakeholder group that we have to value. We have many stakeholder groups that we have to take it all into consideration, and then consult with health officials and board attorneys, et cetera, to make the best decision we can.
And I just add, and in terms of just understanding what people are thinking, not only coming out to the board meetings and sending us emails, board members are community members as well. So we're not walking around in a vacuum.
Fair. But to the extent that there are people that feel like they want their voices to be heard, that may not be able to show up here, or
Of course, we would never deny one. I mean, absolutely, right. Sure.
So I would hate for the decision to be made and go in a direction that the majority, the silent majority, the loud majority, whoever it is, go in the direction that they're not a proponent of, and then to be told, well, we were sort of said not to express our opinion. So I'm just, as a piece of your decision tree, assuming that you'll welcome it, I think it's something that we're going to have to get behind.
Sure, you absolutely can. We certainly would welcome it. We welcome anyone's feedback, and you're absolutely right that, like you said, the loud voice may or may not be the majority, but that's something that if you guys want to do, sure.
Okay, helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Luana Lusberg, 221 Rockland Ave. I'm here to address a number of concerns of mine. Many of them you've heard about already. First, I'd like to again address the mask issue. As a result of our voices being heard last week, the children in both Holdrum and Roberge were given the opportunity to unmask during high-intensity activities. I feel embarrassed to have celebrated this minor concession that our children were already entitled to, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm sad that I had to email principals and come before the board and speak about my children wanting to breathe during gym. A lot of parents here and at home want answers. We want to know that on February 11th, if our governor's emergency powers are not extended, that the masks are no longer mandated, that our Board of Education will allow us to decide for ourselves whether or not to mask our children. We're not here to take a mask off of any child's face. We're not going to take the masks off of your faces. I fully support every single parent's decision. I'm here to advocate for every parent's right to decide whether you want to mask or do not want to mask. It is a personal decision, and we have had enough after 2 years of masking our kids. Last week, I had inquired about the test to stay approach and why our district hadn't adopted this. I was told that this was only an option for vaccinated students. I was sure that this was not the case, but I didn't want to correct you until I had made certain that my information was correct. The test to stay approach was actually developed in an effort to keep unvaccinated students and staff in school without subjecting them to the optional close contact quarantine that our schools have implemented. It's since come to my realization that there's no ideal option here that doesn't blatantly discriminate against a person who is not vaccinated, other than doing away with this close contact quarantine policy altogether. The test to stay approach would lead to unvaccinated children lined up in a nurse's office or the office, I'm not sure where you would put that, awaiting their test results in order to sit with their class. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of this, but as a result of the unnecessary measures that our school has chosen to take, there are parents encouraging their children to exclude other students due to their personal private medical statuses that have been unintentionally disclosed. I personally know of 4 districts, and I think I heard about a couple of others just sitting here tonight, that did away with these close contact quarantines. These quarantine guidelines are not mandated. These guidelines are not covered by an executive order. You agreed last week that most of the close contacts have not contracted COVID-19. There's absolutely no reason to subject our children or their parents to these discriminatory quarantines anymore. I'd like to add that my daughter last month was out with COVID for her 10 days of quarantine. Our whole house had COVID. We're all okay, thank God. Most of the time she wasn't sick, so she was able to do school virtually. At the end of that quarantine, she told me she was depressed. I told her that yes, spending 2 weeks in the house with your family and no one else is depressing. It'll drive you crazy, and that feeling would subside as soon as she went back to school, as it did. She was fine. Kids need to be in school. Granted, she was sick and she was home, and I would have kept her home anyway. But the unnecessary quarantines, we have to stop them. She went back to school and took a test on the math that she had learned virtually. She failed that test. I asked her if this material was the material that she learned while she was at home, and she said yes. She also told me that the other child who was quarantined at the same time also failed the test. Virtual schooling is not working. It's not working. So if we can take that away from the kids who are not sick, we need to do it now. I'm really here tonight because I would like to know if the board has any intention of doing away with this close contact quarantines, and if you haven't looked into it, are you willing to look into it and see what these other schools have done to do away with it in their districts?
We would love to get rid of contact tracing. Our nurses would probably love it as well. We agree. Kids should be in school. Virtual schooling is not a replacement for in-person. We just had a recent conversation with our local public health authorities about contact tracing. I think obviously you guys are aware that the moment we were able to shorten that quarantine period to 5 days, we responded immediately and shortened it. And we have been having conversations, like I said, just recently we had one about relaxing contact tracing and when can that begin and what can we do as a school to start moving in that direction. So we are hopeful that these things do start to relax soon.
Is it up to you to relax this? Do you have the power to relax the close contact quarantines?
It's a little bit more of a complicated answer than just yes or no. So if you'd like, you're certainly willing, if you're willing to, why don't you reach out to me and you can have a little bit more of like a nuanced conversation about it. I'd be happy to do that.
I just want to point out that we are a growing group. It's not just the parents who have been coming here for months, stressing our concerns anymore. These are vaccinated parents, unvaccinated parents, parents of children who are vaccinated, parents of children who are unvaccinated. We're all starting to come together in agreement that enough is enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Falkoff. I'm at 558 Wittich Terrace.
Hi, good afternoon, or good
Hi.
evening.
Thank you for everything you've been doing. I just wanted to say two things. I'll try to keep it kind of quick. I work in a middle school, high school at this point, so I work with older students. So I just wanted to say from the inside the classroom, we're talking a lot about younger students, which is so important because of their speech development, but with the older students too, I'm seeing during that time period where they're transitioning from childhood to adulthood, it's such a tough time on them as it is. Like, it's such a time of anxiety when they're going through all these, hormonal changes. And I see a lot of my students like looking like they're trying to hide behind the masks, like, especially with their hoodies. So now they've got the masks on and they've got the hoodies and they're kind of like just trying to like fade away. So it's tough for me as an educator to watch that. But anyway, so that's one concern. But then my other thing I just wanted to mention tonight was just, since you are all so appropriately like spaced during these meetings, I just thinking maybe you want to move towards unmasking because it's very difficult, like especially since we're sitting so far back. I feel like when we're at the meetings, I'm playing a game of like, where is that voice coming from? So sometimes it's easy because, if you're doing a roll call and you're going through the names, it's easy to tell, like, where it's coming from. But occasionally, I'm like, who is talking right now? And especially especially on YouTube, I'm sure it's, it's very difficult at home too to follow along sometimes with where the voice is coming from. So just, since you're able to all, space appropriately, like, I don't think, I have to, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I have to assume that most of the people in this room wouldn't have a problem with you, being unmasked and all the way over here. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so you know, unfortunately, regardless of our personal opinions too, we're also bound to the mandate, so we can't unmask right now. But I appreciate your comment. Thanks.
Looking around the room, I don't see anyone else who's, spoke too soon. Sorry. It's okay.
I know it's been a long night. I just have a couple questions. Hi, I'm Trisha Tui, 722 Westwood Ave.
Good evening.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My daughter is not currently in district. I pulled her out last year. For the reasons everybody else behind me has discussed. I spoke in August. I just had a couple questions actually just in regards to a couple statements I heard this week and last week. I heard you mention that the road forward policy, is that the same as the safe return plan?
No, it's different.
Okay.
Two different documents.
But the road forward policy is a mandate, you said?
It's a mandated policy.
It's a mandated policy from the state?
It comes from Strauss Esme, which is our policy-making firm.
It's the policy-making firm for the district?
Correct.
Okay, so it's a mandate from the district, but it's not a mandate
Not
from the
necessarily.
state.
So if you keep going with your questions and your comments, it might help me kind of understand what you're.
Well, I had questions
clarify
about the
for you.
safe return plan and was trying to understand because I looked on the Rivervale website for the road forward plan and had a difficult time finding it, but was able to find the safe return plan.
Okay, go to our policy section. So you're looking probably at the COVID hub, which is where the safe return plan lives.
Yeah.
But if you go to the
I just searched.
That's okay. Yeah, if you go to the board homepage,
Okay.
and then you'll find district policies, and then all you have to do is type into the search road forward, and it should come up.
Okay, so that was my question. It's a mandate, but it's not a mandate from the state. So that's a mandate through the district.
No, it's a little bit different. That's what I'm saying. Why don't you take a look at that, and then if you have any questions, reach out to me,
that's fine.
and I can help.
Yep. That's fine, no problem. I did want to ask a couple questions in regards, though, to the safe return plan, which is directly related to the prevention and mitigation policies that are being put in place in the schools, correct? The policies that are in the safe return plan?
It's not policy in that safe return plan, so that's going to keep going, and then hopefully
Okay.
that'll help me just
So
kind of
in
help
reviewing
you.
the safe return plan, the first page states that the template incorporates federally required components. So I was wondering what that meant, federally required.
I don't want to guess, you're probably talking about funding, but we don't receive that type of funding.
We don't receive, you didn't receive ARP funding from,
Not the funding that is directly related to the safe return. So that's what I'm saying. It's probably best, you know, when you come here to really just make some public comments, and then if you have a lot of questions like this, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me.
like I said, my daughter's not in district
no, but that's okay.
anymore.
But even as a citizen of Rivervale,
Yes,
Feel
because
free to
my
give me a
daughter
call.
wants to return back to school. She
Right.
wants to go back to, she's supposed to be in 6th grade right now.
Right.
And I have a kindergartner coming in next year.
Yeah, so you can definitely reach out, and then we can kind of go over all this stuff in detail, and I can
Okay.
hopefully clarify.
I appreciate your response, but I also feel like this is a lot of the response that we keep getting as parents is reach out, please reach out. We're coming here, we're speaking because we want answers from you, and this is the moment that we're supposed to be getting those answers.
Well, no, this is actually the board's meeting.
we can
It's
have
not really mine. It's the board's meeting for public comment.
Okay.
I try to answer questions as best I can because
Okay.
I want you guys to
Okay,
feel
that's fine, so I can.
that I'm responsive. But
Yes.
if it's
No, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand. As parents, I feel like it's not as transparent as, you know, it's made out to be. And I'm just trying to find as much clarity on all
Sure.
of this. Because what it seems to me is that the mask mandate is the mask mandate from the state. Everything else is a policy that you've adapted as a district. It's not, you can change it at any time. The plan, the safe return plan is supposed to be revised every 60 days. And we as the public are supposed to be able to comment on those revisions every 60 days. And initially when it was first put in place, there was no seeking out the public in order to go forward with that plan. You just had a board meeting.
there was a presentation done on it where we then asked
That's
the public
fine,
to
but
give
there was
some
no
input.
seeking out people in town. I don't receive district emails because my daughter, again, is not in district. It was in the middle of the summer when people are away. And in order to get like true public comment, you should be reaching out to the entire district and the town to find out how these parents feel, because I don't think most of the parents would have agreed to any of it. And that's my personal opinion. Again, I'm allowed to make that comment. But at this point, it's getting to a point where now we're digging deeper and we're finding that decisions were made and we were unaware they were made. Yes, you guys had a meeting, a hearing that you all voted on. And in that exact hearing, there's a piece of paper, there's comments made that are written down because you have somebody writing them down as people are making them. And it said, is this typically the amount of parents that show up to the meeting? And one of the responses from the board was, we always have low parent. So you knew you were going to have low parent turnout. But again, you're supposed to be seeking out the public. You are part of our community, all of you. You should be seeking us out because look, none of these people feel differently than the way I feel. And you know, we need to start listening. This isn't going to get smaller. And I'm sad that you guys are all here very late, but I don't want to be here either. My child's not even in school here. And I don't know if I'm ever going to put her back in school because I don't trust you guys. Nobody does. That's why we're all here. And the constant runaround, like, circle back, we'll circle back to this. Like, we don't want to circle back. We want answers. We need a policy in place for February 10th when the mask mandate is lifted. Westwood did it, other districts did it, you can do it. Thank you.
Hi there, good evening. This will be
Hi.
quick and I'll
Good
keep
evening.
it PG, I promise.
Thanks.
Terrific.
Sorry, it gets my heart rate up a little. It's our babies. Okay, two things completely unrelated to each other. First, what Tricia was just mentioning, I actually was that mom in the June 22nd meeting, the only one there with her husband, and then another mom. That was it. And it was my first one ever in person. And I think you guys probably remember me because I was like, hey, does anyone ever come to these meetings? Like, I was excited. It was in person finally after being on Zoom, and nobody was there. So it actually was a really great opportunity, I think, just to talk a little more candidly and openly with everybody. Some board members were here still, others are no longer here, and there's been a little change since, and I can feel it feels different. It's like we're not settled in yet with the new people. It feels weird. I don't know. But the notes were wrong, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. So the other mom who was there, her comment was actually what I had asked. So I don't know if that matters, but especially if that was one where we had a hearing where we were supposed to know what was going on, it wasn't recorded correctly, so that's why I just wanted to bring that up. And then my other question, so if the minutes are incorrect in some way, like you're quoting somebody that they did not say that, are you supposed to change that? Does it matter? I don't know who takes notes, who does that.
We'll look into it.
Yeah. Only because if there was actually, that was one of the days where there was a hearing about the plan moving forward. I think it's important, I'm kind of upset with myself that I was this new mom and I didn't know what to ask or what to look for, what to listen for, and something was kind of discussed or presented. I didn't even know what exactly I needed to, I guess, be on the alert for. And then also, so I know the school had implemented this new filtration system last year, the bipolar needlepoint, I think, deionization. So I was wondering if that hopefully also helps our cause for keeping the air cleaner and safer, especially when distance apart, like when the kids are at their desks, for example, seated, and they want to take a mask break or just not have one on at all. Like, I thought maybe that would be another thing to calm, I don't know, to calm some parents who may be nervous, or also just to encourage those who feel like, yeah, maybe stuff isn't really circulating as much as we think it is. I think that was a great thing that the district did and acted really quickly on. So we should all feel good about just breathing without the mask on our face.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Now I think I'm safe. Is there anyone else who's going to come up? No. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. Appreciate your comments. And I'm going to close the meeting. Close the public comments section of the meeting at approximately 8:50 p.m. Do we have any old business? Anything under, anything? All right, anything under new business? And,
Yes, actually.
okay.
I just wanted to share with you that I recently received from a Holdrum Roberge alumni, Dan Lewer. I don't know if that name sounds familiar to anyone. Two signed copies of actually a newly published book called The Spies in the Civil War for Kids, and it's for kids from 8 to 12 years old. It was named the #1 new release on Amazon for children's American history and Civil War era. He addressed a letter to Mrs. Signori, and he has one book for Rivervale students and one book especially for Roberge. He was very excited to give this to us, and I think there's one in the library now also. And he was also willing to do a virtual class with the author for any teacher interested, and he's currently a teacher in Hawaii. So I told him that I would bring this up at a board meeting. He was very excited about this, so I'll pass this along to Mrs. Signori.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Patrice,
Thank you.
where did you say he's a teacher?
In Hawaii,
Hawaii. Oh, cool.
on the Big Island. We should all be there, right?
Okay, that was interesting new business. Anything else? Okay. Do we have to go into closed session?
No, we do not.
Okay. So, is there a motion to adjourn, end the meeting?
I'll motion it.
I'll second.
Okay. All right. Anybody opposed? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much.